The following is a live recording of an interview with Tracing Woodgrains at Manifest 2025. Stephen couldn't stay for Manifest, so he is not part of this episode. He'll be back as usual next week, of course. There were a couple topics that I didn't get to hit in the interview, so I called back Trace afterwards and we went into a little bit more depth. Welcome, everybody. This is the Bayesian Conspiracy. Just me today with Jack or Trace at this convention.
You know, let's go with Trace for this podcast. I feel like people here know me as Trace.
Okay. You were in the military for a while, right?
Yeah, I was. I spent 6 years as a Chinese airborne cryptologic language analyst in the Air Force.
Do you think more young men should sign up for the military?
That is a really good question. My answer is, so here's the use case that the military filled for me. When I joined the military, I was in Utah. I had just come back from my Mormon mission in Australia. I went back to BYU, the LDS Mormon-dominated school in Utah. And I was there. I had a lot of questions about Mormonism. I was frustrated with the... It was sort of like I was ready to leave my own small town area, and I was sort of kicking around, feeling a bit lost being just one of another million Mormon kids at BYU. And I just experienced a lot of malaise and was really unsure where I was going with my life. So one day, I had been like test driving a van that I was thinking I might buy and live in for the next semester of college. I was kicking around unsure, like I needed to do something, right? And I got a postcard in the mail, and it was one of these like, join the Air Force, serve your country things. And if you ever wondered like who on earth would make like such an important life decision, like why would they send these mailers out? My bad. My fault. I'm the one who made an important life decision based on a postcard in the mail. But it's not something that had ever really occurred to me as an option. It's not something that like my upbringing had suggested to me. It's not something that was on my radar. It was something where I made a calculation that went something like this. I will trade, at the time I thought it would be 4 years of my life, and then I found out that the profession required 6. I will trade 6 years of my life for A, learning Chinese, B, a stable income during this time, and stable knowledge that I will have a job and have a roof over my head and have all of these things, and C, a chance to just sit and figure things out. And, a chance to get a lot of experiences, see the world, so forth, leave Utah, all of that. And what I would say is that absolutely the military fulfilled its side of that deal to me. There are downsides to it in that you are trusting other people with a large chunk of your life. People will say you're locked into the contract. There are always ways to get out of things. People who really, really don't want to be in the military do not stay in the military the full time. People who are absolutely miserable there end up washing out pretty quickly. So there are always ways out. What it does essentially is reduce variance in someone's life. It raises the floor, it lowers the ceiling. You are not going to have a lot of people who are in the rationalist adjacent sphere are effective altruists. You are not going to have like a maximal effective altruist experience in the space where you are making a huge difference in the world. I don't think anything I did in the military made much of a difference in the world, but it is a good way to get yourself on track and get in a decent spot. And I have never regretted joining the military personally. So take that all for what you will.
How did that interact with your whole sexual discovery journey?
So that's a good question. Growing up, I didn't think of myself as gay. I also didn't think of myself as much of anything. I didn't think about sex or care about sex at all. And this was very convenient for me as a Mormon kid who is not supposed to date until 16 years old and is not supposed to marry until like after my mission and everything, not supposed to date seriously until all of that. It was very easy for me to just set it aside and not really think about it and sort of keep it contained in like one very, very small part of myself that I tried not to think about or address. And I never really noticed any attraction to guys with all of this. After I left Mormonism, which came a year and change into my time in the military, I looked around and I started seriously asking for the first time, well, what do I want romantically and what am I interested in and what should I figure out? And it was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders and I could really consider aspects of myself that I had been holding in. And at that point, I started thinking, am I interested in dating men? In the part of the military I was in, like Intel in the Air Force, DLI in particular, the Defense Language Institute, where the language analysts go, I like to call it like the Ivy League reject squad, in that it's a bunch of like smart people who are on their plan Bs or plan Cs in life. It's a bunch of people who mostly haven't planned to wind up precisely where they are. And so it's like a lot of fairly high openness to experience, pretty interesting people from very varied backgrounds, and a lot more liberal inclined than a lot of other parts of the military. The military made it very, very easy for me to just like have a comfortable setting to cautiously figure out what I wanted. And when I decided I wanted to date men, thankfully, I did all of that in the post Don't Ask, Don't Tell era, and it was not any sort of issue at all.
Okay. And it wouldn't have impacted your career if you were in the military?
I was in the military, and it did not impact my career, yes.
Okay. Well, if you went further, it's not a big deal
Right,
anymore?
right. No. It would not have hurt my career in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, great. I come from an older time. The stereotype is still very anti-gay about the military.
Yeah.
Since I did promise audience participation, are there questions for Trace about his time in the military or what he learned there?
Where would you say is the most interesting place that your military life sent you in the world?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And to give an idea of what the candidate options for this are, I had basic training in San Antonio, Texas, and then I had a little bit of tech school down there before going to Monterey, California, for about a year and change at the Defense Language Institute. Then I went back to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas, out in the middle of nowhere, where I spent a few months doing intel training. Then I went out to Washington for a few months, or a month or so, to do what's called SEER training, Survive, Evade, Resist, Escape, where you are essentially in a faux wilderness survival and then a prisoner of war escape scenario training place. After that, I was stationed out in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, for an airborne language analyst, there are about 3 bases that you can choose. It's like Tucson, Arizona, Omaha, Nebraska, or like Florida. And there just aren't many options, right? The great majority go out to Omaha. Anyway, I had also a month of language training school in Taiwan and 3 months deployed to Okinawa, Japan. Of all of those, I loved Taiwan. Taiwan is a beautiful place, my favorite country in the world, really, maybe. Like, everything about Taiwan, I can't say enough superlative things. Loved Monterey, California, had a great time there, and had a good time in Okinawa. I think those were the 3 really interesting ones. Washington was fun. Omaha was, it was a place to live. I met my husband there. It's a city. But yeah, I would say the most interesting of them, if I could go back to one of them or choose like one that, absent any other considerations, I would like enjoy living in, it would be Taiwan.
Did you become very online while in the military, or was this after?
Oh, I became very online like far, far, far before I joined the military. I was very online from the time I was, I think, in 6th grade.
The Mormons allowed that.
Well, so that's the interesting thing, right? And this is one thing that I think has led to me having a pretty unusual perspective on a lot of things, is that on the one hand, I was in Utah, this very culturally conservative, overwhelmingly LDS place, where it took until I was about 11 years old before I really realized even that the majority of the world was not Mormon. And then I always insisted on being on the computer. Like, my parents really couldn't, they tried to put restrictions on, they tried to put boundaries on, and I would always figure out ways to break the restrictions. I would always figure out ways to break the boundaries. I was going to be online. And once you're on there, suddenly as this Mormon kid, I'm going on to, say, a Pokemon forum, right? And on this Pokemon forum, I'd see the politics section, and I'd go, and I'd be like, of course, everyone thinks the same things I do, this conservative Mormon kid from Utah, so let's go argue about gay marriage, right? I'd write my little anti-gay screed, and people got really, really mad at me. They were not impressed. And so I kind of, a lot of my early time online was me sort of having my Mormon upbringing clash with an outside world that was very much not Mormon, and having my world that is immediately physically around me be very, very different from the peers I am meeting in all of these places. And I ended up, for most of my time in my teenage years, being extremely withdrawn online and offline, actually. Being very much just keeping to myself, thinking, not really talking a lot, and being pretty socially isolated. In these online spaces, because I never experienced the online world as a place that agrees with me and is generally acclimated to me, but because it was the place where everyone shared my interests and everyone cared about the things I cared about and everything, I ended up having this fairly conflicted experience where on the one hand I had this home culture where no one really shared my interests and no one really shared my nerdy hobbies, whatever. No one really got that side of me. And then an online world where no one really shared my religious context and no one really shared my cultural context. And if I, it was during the heyday of new atheism and everything, if I tried to express myself, whatever, I felt like I would be very, very shouted down and didn't really have a place there either. And so I developed as sort of a person without a place, or a person torn between multiple cultures without ever being fully integrated into one of them. And that was a big part of my upbringing.
I know a bunch of people in rationalist communities that are not in San Francisco that often feel like they don't have much of a culture, a community, because there just aren't that many of us out in the broader world. Some of them either are talking about, or if you have even like actually turned to religion, because like religion provides you just a community, everyone tight there, and yet you felt that you were very isolated despite being both a Mormon and right in the heart of Mormonism.
Yeah, so that sense of isolation, I mean, I missed that part of Mormonism. There was very much that sort of community there, and it's something that I was able to take for granted that a lot of people don't get at all, which is that whenever I went to a new city, you know, we would go to church on Sunday, and immediately we would be right at home. Like, the people there got our values, got us, understood what we were about, and even like you would be in basically the same lesson in church that you would be in your home ward in Utah. Like, you would go in and they'd be teaching exactly the same thing that you would have done that week. It all felt very similar and very much a homey thing. You know, you go somewhere new, you have a community, you have a group of friends, you have people who care about you and share your values, and there's sort of this you against the world sense with all of that I definitely experienced. I had that. What I'll say is, I think a lot of nerdy people in general like end up developing a lot of really weird off-the-wall hobbies that other people don't. And like, not many people in my home ward in Utah were like spending all of their time on like Pokemon forums or like playing all these like niche video games and everything. I had a few friends and everything, but I think it was just sort of like normal sort of isolation that a lot of nerdy kids kind of experience, tempered by religious community of a bunch of people that shared my values, not fully like. That didn't change every aspect of it, but definitely made a lot of it easier, and it was discouraging and frustrating to leave that whole community and be like, great, now I don't have this backdrop of shared values and all of that.
Okay. That actually ties in pretty nicely with what I wanted to bring up next. Your name, your online name, Tracing Woodgrains, you've mentioned this before. Okay. You should probably tell the story.
Yeah.
Please tell the story first before I continue.
Yes. So, in the Ender's Game series of books, in the third book of the series, Xenocide, which has a bit of a mixed reputation online and offline, I feel like, but I really enjoyed it. There is a subplot in that story about a girl who traces wood grains. Specifically, the story goes, in her culture, in the world that she's on, in the sci-fi story, their religion is centered around people with these OCD-like impulses where they want to do one thing or another, and it feels like these are sacred urges. And in her case, the urge is kneeling down and tracing wood grains. And this becomes a very holy thing for her, becomes a part of her culture, becomes a signal that she is chosen by God and that this all matters. At some point in the story, people come and explain basically to them that all of this is a lie, that they had been genetically modified, whatever, to have these impulses, and it was so that they would develop this sort of culture that would make them essentially less likely to cause trouble, type of thing, that it was all convenience for people who were playing a game well beyond their understanding. They got offered the opportunity to, and chose to take the opportunity to have these urges taken away. And suddenly this world's whole religious structure collapses. Suddenly this thing that they have relied on in this community that they have built up collapses. Everyone looks around and says, you know, guess it was all a lie, that sucks, whatever, let's move on. She doesn't. She stops feeling these urges, but she sees it as like a test from God, whatever, and she kneels down and traces the wood grains again and just keeps going and keeps going. And in the end, years down the line, right, at the very end of the story, she has continued maintaining this form her whole life of holding up a religion that no one really believes in anymore. And everyone around her starts to see her as something of a saint, as someone who has maintained a sense of culture that they have lost, a sense of this form that they no longer have, and has maintained adherence to something that feels, in a sense, precious to them. She closes off, like, before she dies, she's like, you know, Mother, Father, like, did I do it right? Anyway, that story made me think a lot when I was stepping away from Mormonism. It was something that, you know, 6 to 8 generations of my family had been Mormon, had built up this culture. My whole civilization, my whole world was built on Mormonism. I had grown up on stories of people coming to Utah, traveling a long distance, traveling from England or Denmark or the Eastern United States, sacrificing everything to build this culture and this world. So it was a long time before I stepped away that I really started questioning it and really started asking a lot of questions. You know, it was at the start of my mission, at the start of my Mormon mission, I told my family and friends, like, I hope this is true. I believe this is true. I don't know that this is true. I know it's good, and I'm trying to find out whether it's true. And I was working really, really hard to try to figure out, is this all true? Can I believe this and pursue this and maintain this. And that story rung through my head a lot as I was figuring it all out. So when I finally decided it is time, I need to actually make a decision on this, decide whether I'm going to keep kneeling and tracing the woodgrains or stand up and move on, I decided that I would create an account with that username and post to the ex-Mormon subreddit and ask, like, convince me, like, should I leave all of this or should I not? And that's the origin of the name.
I heard your story about the end of the book before I read it. I read Ender's Game when I was young, like probably everyone in this room. Didn't get to Xenocide until last year. When I read the ending, I was, I think, a combination of horrified and, like, I cried a little bit when I read that part, although for, I think, a different reason. Because it seemed to me, like you said, the urge had been taken away. And so when she knelt down to do it, she was following a pattern, but there was nothing inside anymore, and it felt like she was forcing herself to do it anyway, and got trapped in this local minima that she pursued for the rest of her life. Do you feel like the urge to keep the religion going is it anything like that? Is the tracing of the woodgrains a good thing for a person to spend their entire life doing?
Well, it's interesting because you can paint it both ways, right? And people do paint it both ways. You know, you can paint it as you figured this all out and then you had the courage to get up and leave it all behind. Mm-hmm. Or you figured this all out and you had the humility and the patience to kneel down and trace it again and maintain this culture and maintain this frame that has provided you community and benefits and provided something that has that you've built your culture on, that you've built your whole frame on.
Yeah.
And it is... You know, I'm not going to say that for me, I respect one of those paths a lot more than the other. A lot of people who I admire and respect have been at the same decision point I've been at and made different decisions, and I'm really, really sympathetic to what they've done, in part because it's a lot harder to build something than it is to tear something down. People can do a lot of really beautiful things in flawed systems. Having no system at all isn't actually, in many cases, an improvement over having a flawed system. And ultimately, I do value truth very, very highly, and I want people to build systems that are founded in truth and keep moving away from these systems that have deep-running flaws built into them and have the courage to build something new. But I have a lot of sympathy to the people who look around and say, I think that the best thing I can do is keep this going, and the best thing I can do is maintain all of this. And I don't know that, you know, a lot of people experience leaving religion as this moment of freedom and this moment of joy and this moment of finally all of this stuff is off my shoulders. I never did. I never experienced it like that. I experienced it as a palpable sense of loss, as something that was vital to me broke and will never be made right again.
The rationalists often say that that which can be destroyed by the truth should be. And I think I found at least a couple cases where that is hard to argue.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of that saying. I mean, I'm both skeptical of it and at the same time, like, I've always had this drive, like, I need to still figure out how to align with truth. I need to get closer. I need to get closer. I do have this, like, urge to, like, tear it all down if it's not, if someone's lying or if someone's deceiving something. I mean, and this is what a lot of my weird online obsessions come down to. I see someone lying about something. I see someone saying some untrue thing for some instrumental reason that I just want to tear in and to tear it all apart and show people what is actually happening. And so that's a very deep-running urge for me. But at the same time, I am sympathetic to the stories we tell ourselves and the structures we build on those stories and the beauty that emerges from them.
Sometimes there's some things that you probably don't need to tear down. Maybe you can find some way to salvage.
Yeah, well, I think it's like you want to invite people towards the truth. This is actually a very Mormon conception, right? You want to invite people towards the truth. You want to present the truth to them. And then you want people to actually have an honest choice about the truth, knowing, having it all laid out in front of them, like what you think, what you believe, what your values are, why they are that way. I'm an evangelist in the sense of I think that my values should be spread and I think that other people should align with them. I think that anyone who has really serious beliefs and really serious values should more or less think that. And so I respect people who evangelize their beliefs and who talk about them to others and who don't treat them as, you know, I believe my thing and you believe your thing. No, I think that people should align with it. However, I also think that this element of choice is important. This element of people independently deciding, like, what should I do is important, and beliefs should primarily bind the willing. The core value of liberalism is letting people with these different positive belief systems have a peace treaty and be able to get along regardless. And there is something very important to me about both the opportunity to maintain a serious, positive, structured system of values, to encourage it in others, and then to find ways to make peace with and work alongside those who hold different values. And so when I say, like, I don't think that things should be destroyed necessarily, I want people to, build something beautiful alongside me and something that we are working towards truth with that. I want that. But if someone finds themselves drawn to a different thing, I don't want to then tear their thing down and tear it to pieces and smash it and show them why everything they value is wrong and bad and like start this intractable conflict. I want to figure out which areas do we align and where can we still work together.
Yeah. Do you think Mormonism can be brought more into alignment with you, or maybe some splinter faction broken off where you can have both?
Not really. So the thing about Mormonism, and the thing that makes it an intractable problem for me, Judaism is an interesting comparison in that Judaism is a faith that is built largely around a set of both common ethnicity and common practice in a lot of sense. That you can be a practicing Jew without people necessarily inquiring a lot about the core driving beliefs behind it. And you have people who are Orthodox Jews, you have Reform Jews, you have secular Jews who are all cognizably Jewish. The trouble with Mormonism is that the core proposition of it has always been so devastatingly literal. That the core proposition of it was always that Joseph Smith was a prophet who actually saw these golden plates and actually restored the Church of Jesus Christ to the earth, and that the truth of all of these things very fundamentally matters. And either you are in or you are out in that context. And either he was a hero or a villain, either he was this or that. Ultimately, like, people looking at me now and seeing he's married to a man, this or that, maybe if they changed their stance on gay marriage, he would go back to it, things like that, whatever. My response to that has always been, there are serious theological reasons why Mormons really struggle with gay marriage. They have built their theology so much around this idea of a man and a woman together into eternity, all of that, that makes it really hard for them. And I can make an argument from my secular perspective about how I think they can alter their theology, and perhaps eventually will alter their theology to fit gay people in, the same way they altered their theology around black people. I can make that from a sociological, secular perspective, but that's not going to be very persuasive to a Mormon. And there was a period of time towards the end of my time in Mormonism where I held the stance, and I stand by this, that I was like, if the church changes its stance about gay people, I will first change my own stance and start supporting gay people, and secondly, I will leave Mormonism. And while I would appreciate them being brought more in alignment with my values at this point, it would be nice to avoid some of that tension. The truth claims matter. In Mormonism, the truth claims very much matter. And while I can find and try to build something Mormonism inspired and to try to bring some of the things I value about it to the world, one of the things that I took most firmly from it is that truth does matter. And it's futile, in a sense, to try to bring that and make a culture based on something that is untrue.
Jehovah's Witnesses have a similar focus on the importance of truth. And I think it's ironic how their most literal-minded autistic followers will follow that right out of the religion.
Yeah.
Do we have questions about Mormonism or religion for Trace?
Religion holds a particular cultural purpose in people's lives. You could maybe argue that in modern society, people substitute other things for that role in their lives, whether that's like work or effective altruism or whatever. What, in your view, are the healthiest substitutes that people use? And what's the best we can hope for the next 30 years of cultural evolution on this front?
Fantastic question, and that's something I think about a lot. You named what I would describe as the healthiest secular religion currently in existence, which is effective altruism. Now, I use religion as a broad term. I have my own particular definition of it that doesn't always agree with other people's definitions, but for me, a religion is something that provides the underlying unified moral impulse in someone's life. That is the thing that really determines the core of their values. And I take secular religion building very seriously, and I think that in this day and age, one of the most urgent projects is building healthier secular religions. I think effective altruism is broadly healthy, although I disagree with them on some of their... I think that they underestimate a value of duty to the near in a way that distorts their culture in predictable and unfortunate ways, and they're a lot more utilitarian than I am. But by and large, I think that they are a community of people who are very, very serious about doing good, think hard about that, are willing to make sacrifices for it in cognizable, appreciable ways, in general, when I have been around them and have observed them, they are very serious about that effort, are incredibly pleasant and thoughtful people to be around, and I respect them a lot. Other new religions haven't fared so well in my eyes. Social justice progressivism, I think, is the most vital new religion right now. And when I say vital, I mean something that really feels confident that it is correct and it should win, and of course it is going to take over all of culture, just like Christianity before the Peace of Westphalia and the Scientific Revolution, just like any of these religions, any of these times. It is not natural for a religion to say, I am contained to specific spheres. It is not natural for a religion to say, I don't have the government in my control and I don't have science in this. Like, a really vital religion is going to try to nudge into all spheres. It took centuries and lots of blood to tame Christianity down to the level that it is now, and to make it a religion that is compatible with liberalism and with the modern culture that we appreciate. So I think social justice progressivism is in sort of an early, wild, vital stage where it is throwing a lot of things at the wall and trying to expand into a lot of spheres and trying to really attack anyone outside of it, and not really conceiving of itself as a religion per se, so much as just what good people think, in a way that can be incredibly unpleasant for people who are both trying to be good and disagree with some of its propositions. It can perhaps mature into something healthier. I would dispute some of its propositions, right? But yeah, so those are, I would say, the two really major secular religions that I'm looking at right now. And obviously social justice progressivism is several orders of magnitude larger than effective altruism. But I think that the task of developing a secular religion that I would actively endorse is still one that is in progress.
We have a full hour-and-a-half episode with Trace from last year about the social justice progressivism religion, which I'll link in the show notes. Before we go on, the effective altruist religion, I find that it has a similar problem in that the core tenets of it, if you take them literally and seriously, lead to a certain level of sacrifice which makes it untenable. Like, it can't reproduce. They look to be working around that very well through institutional antibodies, patches, whatever it is, to manage, tell people, stop at 10%, that's good enough, you don't have to give your entire life over. But, all those things are things where you have to ignore the actual core text, and so it's always there. Do you worry about that? Or do you think, like any other religion, it'll work itself out if people listen to the teachings rather than the...
Yeah, absolutely, I worry about that. And I mean, this is one of my issues. Like, any community that can look at negative utilitarians and say, these guys have some good points. These guys, we basically get along with these guys. These guys who, if you're looking at them, technically they say that, yes, omnicide would be the optimal outcome. And that would be nice if everyone died. But we get that we have practical restrictions, and we get that it would be unpleasant to individuals to kill them. So we'll make our peace with maybe eventually killing all wild animals or something. Like, if you see someone like that and you're saying, this guy's kind of like me. He makes some good points. Let's hear him out on the suffering thing. I think that there's a danger in that. And usually effective altruists don't bite all the bullets with that and tame it a little bit. If you look at people like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who are like, start at deontology, go 75% of the way to utilitarianism, and then stop. People recognize these stopping points and appreciate them and talk about them. But I do think that there's a danger in whenever the most rigorous interpretation of your thing suggests what for many people would say are ludicrous outcomes, there's a danger in that, and your zealots can end up doing harm.
Do you think it's possible for a religion to have core tenets which will not go that way if taken completely seriously?
I do, yes.
I hope somebody can work on that.
Yeah.
I saw a question back there.
I'm not entirely sure I have a coherent question, but hopefully it conjures something up. I've noticed something in the rationalist community. A lot of people were raised quite religiously to, maybe to this degree and maybe not quite so far. And many of them kind of moved to the other end of the spectrum of being very fervent atheists, which to me feels almost the same on a different side of the coin. So, I mean, if you have any commentary on that, but I'm also curious where you stand on this. I'm sensitive to the fact that also spirituality is something on a spectrum, and leaving religion doesn't necessarily mean that you leave any connection to maybe something that's a part of that religion, or what some might call an irrational belief, right?
Yeah. I think that it's absolutely correct, and it's a pretty common observation that these spaces attract a lot of people who were raised in pretty strict religions and then shift away from it. Maybe it's like the underlying Puritan impulse shining through, and I don't say Puritan as a slur, 20% of my ancestors were Puritans, right? This is like the culture that I was steeped in, this impulse towards building a city on a hill and having rules and having structure and having something that matters with that and taking those things seriously. And I respect that impulse, and I think that rationalists sort of share this impulse with religious people in a way that is broadly healthy. In general, they avoid a sense of sheer hedonism in life. At the same time, becoming a strong atheist from being a strong religious person is in many ways only natural, because if you are making that serious of a change, you need to be prepared to seriously defend it. People who stand on their beliefs and are willing to be a bit contrarian and a bit disagreeable about things and not just make peace with everyone. And, I vary in my own tendency with that. I'm a bit more of a peacemaker than a lot of people in that sphere are. But if you are serious about that, then you are going to get in a lot of conflicts with it. So it's inherent. At the same time, like, it has been softening lately. When I first came across the rationalist community, I bounced off because I was religious. I was like, these guys are they hate religion, and I don't want to deal with that. But I think increasingly, especially as Scott Alexander gained prominence, he has a sort of earnest curiosity about other people and the world around him that a lot of religious people responded to, and led to overall a healthier dynamic with regard to religion, where people stopped feeling a need to be arguing relentlessly about the object level questions of it all the time and started looking at it more seriously as a sociological phenomenon. And I think that's broadly healthy.
Yeah. I think if you fully reject religion, you kind of have to default to atheism to start with, because like everything I've been told is a lie. What do? I need to begin from the ground, and that means starting from nothing. And also, in addition to that, it feels very intensely emotional to have been betrayed by everyone you trusted in your childhood. There's some bitterness there.
Yes.
It took me well over a decade. I finally am starting to accept that there are some good things about religion, that we have these emotional hooks within us for spirituality for a reason. Religions use those to unite humans in a way that makes us better. But man, that impulse to only believe true things, it's strong, and it really, really butts up against religion hard. I don't know, it's a hard project. You had a follow-up?
I guess one of the curiosities I have is maybe the line between being atheist and agnostic. And the reason that I see some parallel between a really intense connection to atheism is that it feels, for me, and it's an unpopular opinion around here, that it's not so dissimilar to a fervent belief in a God when you fervently disbelieve. There are a lot of different arguments on proof and non-proof, and that's even outside of religious context of ritual and the pass-fail of getting to wherever you might want to go after you're dead, and belief in the sort of spiritual side. And I don't know how many people even see a differentiation, I guess, between atheism and agnosticism, and whether that even matters.
Sure. So what I'll say quickly in response to that is that ultimately, atheism is the question of whether you believe in God, and you can separate that from the question of attachment to the atheist community. Say a lot of effective altruists, for example, are atheists, but they don't spend their time talking about theism and debating theism and thinking about theism and talking about theism core to their identities. They make the question of how to help people in developing countries and how to build safe AI and these things, or core to their positive identity. And anyone who ends up identifying at their core as being against something, like they spend a lot of their time like fighting against something, anti-theist, anti-woke, anti-whatever, it selects for the people who are most fervently against that thing. Anti-Mormon even, like people, ex-Mormon subreddits, ex-religious subreddits in general, select for the people who are most stridently against that thing and most aggressively against it. Pure selection effects in these anti-something communities create often underlying somewhat unhealthy tendencies that I think are visible for anyone observing them from the outside. At the same time, when something has things to oppose, it's useful to have people to oppose it. So there's this balancing act here, right? But in general, I think what you're seeing with atheism is like people who build anti-theism or a strong sentiment against theism or attraction to atheist communities as a core part of their identity. There's a question whether some of those communities are healthy. I think some of them are, or whether they are the most healthy thing possible that people could be doing. I think usually they're not. I think it's less atheism versus agnostic. A lot of atheists will say, like, I'm an agnostic atheist, right? Like, I don't know for sure, but this is where I lean. I think it's less this certainty and more the question of which communities do they spend their time in.
There's the part of like coming from religion to rationalism, and then there's the exiting rationalism into what is sometimes called post-rationalism. People seem to realize the need for like a load-bearing ideology beyond rationalism that kind of takes the place of religion. And I know people where they've gone more Catholic or Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox seems to be a thing, but there's a lot of other ways to do that. And I just, if that term means anything to you, or if it's even worth talking about post-rationalism.
Yeah. So post-rationalism, I can't be a post-rationalist because I was never a rationalist, honestly. I love the rationalists. I appreciate them.
Thank you. You would not believe how many post-rats were never rationalists. It's infuriating.
Yeah, so I love the rationalists. I mean, Eneasz is a good friend of mine, right? And a lot of people in the community are fantastic, and I get on with them very well. I I've never focused on Bayes' theorem. I've never focused on AI safety. I've never been drawn to these core rationalist topics that much, even as I've appreciated their writers. So I can't really be post-rationalist with all of that. That said, I think the phenomenon you're identifying is real, and it's basically where I fall with rationalism also. And I think I've argued about this a bit with Eneasz before, that my discomfort's the wrong word. I like the rationalist again, but my disconnect with rationalism in a lot of cases is that while I value truth and while I value reason, I do want to have a clear, my values matter, and being purely rational is not going to get me to those values. Being purely rational is not going to determine which values I want to uphold, and you can have purely rational people who, again, I go back to negative utilitarians a lot. I like picking on them because I think they deserve to be picked on. That you can have a purely rational people who starts from some innocuous sounding premises like suffering is bad and very rationally arrives at horrifying conclusions like omnicide is good. That is a pure rational chain of logic that you can get to from that. It is clearly articulable. You can defend every line in it. And if you are saying this reason is all that matters, you go back to this core premise, you go back to this axiom. So I think pure reason is a little bit overrated in that. I like people who are good a lot more than I like people who are consistent. I think I prefer someone who inconsistently aligns with my values in a lot of ways over someone who holds this very dogmatic adherence to things, even when they cause destructive things. Anyway, with all that, I think post-rationalism is kind of gesturing towards that same sphere of ideas of feeling like we want to identify what our actual telos is, what our actual goals are. We want to figure out lessons we can take from things other than the purely rational. And honestly, I think some of the best post-rats are Eliezer Yudkowsky and Scott Alexander. I think they have some great post-rat insights all the time about the limits of pure rationality. So,
because we're so low on time and you have a very exciting new project that you're working on, I want to give you a minute to at least talk about that new project, the Educational Foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I recently founded the Center for Educational Progress, a think tank focused on orienting education around the pursuit of excellence. There are a lot of ways I can describe it, but one of the most straightforward ways is to identify the amount of funding. Speaking of telos that we have been looking at lately, you have to look at what do you want to accomplish with education? And in education policy, there has been a lot of funding and a lot of attention focused on equity in education. And when you focus purely on equity in education, you arrive at, say, you want to say, how do you make gifted education more equitable? How do you make admissions to this school more equitable? Immediately, you are going to arrive at answers that start, say, weakening admissions criteria or start weakening the strength of testing or things like that. You start from this premise, you end up at downhill things that I can't support and that I don't like at all, where you're saying top-end achievement, anytime you're pushing the ceiling up, you're making things less equitable, therefore we will never think about pushing the ceiling up. And right now, the equity-focused ecosystem in education is massive. It consumes billions of dollars a year. Basically, every education school takes it seriously. Basically, every education researcher focuses on it. Basically, everyone in the field of education thinks a lot about this. Then you have a contrasting sphere, the choice sphere, that says markets will decide, let markets decide, market mechanisms will arrive at the correct things with that. And most of the energy against all this equity-focused stuff has been just let people decide, public schools are failing, yada, 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 so let people choose out of them and the market will make things good. I really believe very, very firmly that first off, you can identify what excellence looks like in a lot of domains, and that one of the core roles of school is to develop people towards excellence, to cultivate excellence in people. If you are looking at math class, the purpose of math class is to teach people math. We can understand how to teach people math effectively. We should understand how to teach people math effectively. And there are a lot of things that end up getting lost in this battle, that when you have, say, one group of people saying we should get rid of advanced classes and one group of people saying, we should just choose and let the market figure it out, it ends up being sort of a skewed policy debate where you're always fighting between regression and the status quo or change in this choice-oriented direction, but never actually focusing on the question of how can we focus on the telos of education. You look at this choice ecosystem, it's much smaller than the equity ecosystem, but still large, well-funded. You look at the excellence ecosystem in education, like people focusing on this telos, and it is tiny. I don't know that people really realize just how tiny it is, how rare it is for people to really be thinking about raising the ceiling and the most effective ways to learn and the ways that tracking and things help with that. So what I'm really trying to do with the Center for Educational Progress is map all this out and push people to identify the levers and identify the cultural things that we have been missing with this focus between equity and choice towards pushing people towards what to me matters the most in education, which is actually educating people and actually pushing people as far as they can, as fast as they want to go.
I think the reason people are opting out and just saying let's go to free markets and vouchers and taking their kids wherever they want is because, like you said, there's so much on the equity side. It feels like the entire system is just the equity side, It seems easier to be like, okay, you entire government force, I can't fight you, do your thing, just leave me alone if I go over here with my children. Do you actually think we can fight back against that and bring back the discourse into public education that maybe we should bring back tracking?
Sure. So first off, go over there and do what? Go over there with my kids and do what? Go over there and what is your goal with your kids? Even if you are in a choice-oriented system, even if you are in a market system, you need to be able to answer the how and what of how does effective learning look? What does point A to point B, expertise research, all of these things look like? And you need to be able to answer that even in the most choice-oriented system. Number two, systems belong to those who show up. When you inject new ideas into a conversation, or old ideas shifting the battlefield somewhat, if you are in an equity frame, if the conversation is constantly in an equity frame, then it is very difficult to argue against some destructive propositions. Say, getting rid of advanced classes. If the only lens you are using is equity, it is very hard to argue against getting rid of advanced classes in an equalization lens. If you can shift the frame, a lot of people who nominally support one thing or another suddenly realize, no, actually, I think this thing is good too. You know, you look at, say, the rank and file of Democrats and the rank and file of Americans. And David Shore, a political researcher, has done some fantastic polling on this, polling different issues by popularity. And in America, the least popular initiative ever advanced by the Democratic Party or people in the Democratic Party, less popular than reparations, less popular than defund the police, is getting rid of advanced classes in schools. When that is the reality, and when you have so few people actually pushing for something different and pushing in a different direction, I think it is overwhelmingly clear that there is not just possible but urgent to orient people towards excellence, and the time is absolutely right for that.
Nice. I have to skip my next question for time, but I wanted to end with, you're working on this Center for Education. You're working on reclaiming the Democratic Party. You are, I'm assuming, practicing law, about to... Like, I know you were in law school for the longest time.
I'm going into my third year of law school.
Okay. You're in your third year of law school. I hear you still play video games or something.
Uh-oh.
How do you have time for all of this in your life?
That is a very dangerous question. Nobody should follow my time management habits. Do not look at me doing all of these things and think, wow, this guy is sure using his time in a productive and effective way. How I have time for things is last-minute panic and a horribly disordered method where I suddenly dive down a rabbit hole and cannot stop myself from diving down this rabbit hole for this length of time, and I will put off every other responsibility I have so I can figure out how to do this one thing. And sometimes that's awesome and it leads to me writing long, in-depth investigative journalism pieces, and sometimes it kind of sucks and leads to me spending 40 hours in a week on Pokemon when I really should be studying for my law school finals. So, do not follow me for time management advice, but hopefully sometimes the results of that chaotic process bear worthwhile fruit.
You do a lot more than 90% of people out there, even with your crazy schedule. It's amazing.
Well, it's always great to talk.
One last time, how can people support your new Center for Educational Excellence?
Yeah, so if you're interested in the project, go to educationprogress.org, read our manifesto, sign up. You can join our Discord, you can donate, things like that there. In general, if you're curious about my writing or my other work, I write at TracingWoodgrains.com about topics much like the wide range we discussed today. I write on Twitter at TraceWoodgrains, and I tend to be around.
I'm a huge fan. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me again on a holiday weekend.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to chat.
I am going to go more or less in order of what we talked about during the live show. First thing is, you said in the military you were a Chinese airborne cryptological language analyst, which sounds awesome. But you also said you don't think you did anything in the military that made much of a difference in the world?
Yes, and unfortunately, just as a general rule of thumb, I don't talk a lot about the specifics of my military service because as soon as I get a lot into the specifics, it's the sort of thing that I need to clear with people. So, I can only talk in vague generalities about my military service.
Do you think, in general, the military wasn't doing much with that thing? Or do you just think that you specifically needed to do something larger on your own, and being part of a larger organization that does stuff isn't ambitious enough?
A little of column A, a little of column B. I would say more of column A. In particular, this is some part I can talk about. I was waiting for a long time to get my security clearance. There are a lot of bureaucratic barriers like that in military service. And in my case, I spent a year and change of my time in the military where my job every day was basically go to this room, keep this room open in case someone wants to use it, known as a detail. and details in general. These are jobs where you just are basically just filling time, filling space, and waiting. I wound up spending a great deal of my time, like I said, a year and change just doing that. And my training pipeline was pretty long. Even though I was 6 years in the military, not a whole lot of those 6 years were actually out actively doing my job, having been trained and in the field.
I see. During detail duty, is that when you go online and read and talk and chat?
Yeah, absolutely. That was, I had a lot of time for it.
If it hadn't been for detail duty, do you think you still would have ended up with all that time in the subreddit and your life taking this trajectory?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this was overdetermined. I was always going to spend a lot of time online and think and write and talk about these things. I was doing a lot of it while I was at language school as well. And I've been doing a lot of it at every step of my life. So no, I think that I always would have found time and space to write about things I care about in the public sphere.
When I was doing accounting, it doesn't feel very fulfilling. And one of the things I would often tell myself is that I am part of a much larger organization which brings housing to people. And housing is really important. People need a place to live. So I'm doing my part there. Do you think that's not ambitious enough? Do you think in general, people who are just, going to their day jobs, being accountants or plumbers or whatever, aren't ambitious enough and should be doing something further?
I absolutely don't think that. I think that we really should have a culture of more respect and seriousness and thoughtfulness around professions like that than we do. That there is something valuable and incredibly useful, incredibly important about the normal, mundane, day-to-day tasks of keeping the world running. And I think that everyone who sits humbly in one of those unimportant seeming things and just keeps one small corner of the world running and takes that job seriously and does it well is in an important, real way heroic in doing that. I think that that stuff is a lot of the fabric of what keeps everything rolling.
But in your case, you wanted to do something more to make a difference personally, leave your fingerprint on the world.
In my case, I wanted to write. I've always wanted to write. Writing is the thing that I have cared about since I was a very small child. And the form that took was different, and the topics that takes are always different, but the common theme was writing. In terms of making a mark, leaving my impact, I think everyone dreams of that to some extent, and certainly I, at this point particularly, would like to do that. But I don't think it can or should be accomplished exactly by I want to make my mark on the world so much as here is a useful thing, let me go do that and see what happens. Here's another useful thing, let me go do that and see what happens. And just working upward and outward from there, finding useful things in whatever scope you happen to be in.
Back to the military thing, you said that the Defense Language Institute was full of, in your words, Ivy League rejects that were on their B or C plan in life. I imagine that the people who generally go to the Ivy League are a very different social class, and there was a big class divide between you and the rest of them. Is that true, and what was that like?
So I use that term facetiously in the sense of it's basically just a highly intelligence selected place in an institution that doesn't select for high conscientiousness. That is, you take a couple of tests to qualify to become a language analyst, and you have to do pretty well on those tests. It is one of the most academically selective or intelligence test selective professions in the military. That and Navy nukes are the ones that have the highest requirements. But it is also an enlisted military position that doesn't require a college degree, that doesn't require a resume, that doesn't require anything like that. And so when I say that term, I mean that you have people who score quite well on tests, but haven't taken the standard path with that in general. And you had some who had master's degrees, you had some who had bachelor's degrees, things like that. But by and large, very diverse group of people in a meaningful way. One of my friends there had been an English as a second language teacher, a sign language teacher, so forth, worked in a lot of communities of the deaf. Someone had been a plumber. Another guy had lived for a while in a Buddhist monastery before coming out. Some people were just out of high school. It's a very, very wide-ranging group of people. And no, I fit in there well. It was my crowd. I liked them. I got on well with them. It was a great group.
Do you feel like you were also low conscientiousness at the time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely unambiguously, yes. Look, I had arrived there after dropping out of college, It's not like I was there in some, glamorous, organized way. It was like I needed to get out of Utah. This provided a way to get out of Utah. I got out of Utah.
Nice. Do you still keep in contact with some of them?
I do, yeah. I'm actually going to a friend's wedding next week who I met in the Air Force.
Oh, that's awesome. Moving on to the Tracing Woodgrains username. You said that it was chosen in part as a challenge to the ex-Mormon subreddit to convince you to leave Mormonism rather than just to continue tracing the Woodgrains. I was going to ask you more about that, but then I saw that you put up a very long blog post recently that had a lot of excerpts from your past talkings with the people there. I've read some of them. If people want to go to read that, I'm going to link it in the show notes. When you reread those posts now, what do you think? What do you feel, I guess, most when you look back at that from today's vantage point?
A mix of pride and melancholy. The same way I react to anything around my journey out of Mormonism. I am happy with the way I handled things. I look back and I wouldn't change how I handled things really at any step of the way. I feel good about my approach all throughout. It was also a very tragic set of circumstances, unavoidably, in the same way it always is going to be when you are abandoning the core of what has given your culture and your family meaning. I have used a line recently that I experienced leaving Mormonism not as a relief, but as a feeling that something was wrong in the world that would never be put right again. And every time I go back and read my articles about it, I feel the same way. So yeah, there's always a mix of melancholy and satisfaction that I took the path I did the way I did.
Do you think there's any arguments that anyone could have made that would have kept you in the church, even if not a believer, but just going through the motions?
No, there was a specific time, there was a specific point at which not when I realized that it wasn't rooted in truth, but specifically when I realized what it had been doing to my moral frame and the ways it was causing me to accept certain things as givens and reject certain things that if they were actually rooted in God's will for me would be fine, but when they weren't would be pretty destructive and pretty deep-rooted in my worldview. And as an example to that, I give the historical case that really persuaded me that this was accurate was the case of Lowry Nelson, who was a sociologist who was asked by the Mormon Church when they were looking to expand into Cuba, basically about the prospects of teaching Black people there. And this was at a time when Mormonism did not consider Black people worthy of the full blessings of the church, didn't give them anoint them to the quote-unquote priesthood, didn't let them enter temples, so forth, or receive the full blessings of that, what have you, in the church parlance. Anyway, this sociologist made a really humanist and really persuasive case that resonates very much with certainly our modern ideals of the fundamental equality of man and the fundamental importance of seeing everyone in the same light, so forth. And he got really, really harshly rebuked by the prophet and the other leaders of the church, saying basically, we know you understand the tenets of the gospel. We know you understand that the house of Israel, the church, has always been endogamous, has always married within its race. The idea of marrying someone of another race certainly does not have God's sanction. The idea of this equality of man, no, we know that people were unequal before the world began, so forth. And really harshly rebuked him for this. The church has changed on that since then. They have adapted their doctrine. They have shifted in 1976. I believe 76 or 78. I think it was 76. Anyway, they shifted. But realizing that people could very firmly hold that as part of their frame and then slowly shift to that, the whole time feeling like they were righteous and correct and necessarily doing God's will, looking around and seeing the things the church did at present, even many things that I was comfortable with at the time, like, say, opposition to gay marriage and stuff, I didn't treat as a big deal. I started realizing just how thoroughly that was worming its way into my psyche and making me accept things that I wouldn't accept in a vacuum because I felt like they were God's will. And at that point, it was very important for me to get out and figure out what I actually felt and thought about different things.
Why would it be, if it was the case that God existed and this was his will, why would it be okay to partially exclude Black people or gay people?
Yeah, so There are certain preconditions with things like that you accept as true when you're accepting it. So you accept that God is all loving, you accept that God is all knowing, you accept that God has a plan for everyone, and you accept that his plan is the path that ultimately will lead to the greatest possible happiness for everyone and the greatest possible fulfillment for everyone. So you understand, for example, the theological argument against gay people is that there's this idea within Mormonism that, God has a wife, that every person, their ultimate eternal destiny, their highest eternal goal is to have this eternal family, husband and wife together, having kids and propagating a universe of their own, that sort of thing. Mormons would argue that being gay sets you off that whole eternal path and so forth. And it's something that is really persuasive within this like LDS frame and within this theological, cosmological frame if you're accepting all of its premises. As soon as you reject its premises and as soon as you are looking at life as we have it, as the rest of us would see it, it's not persuasive at all. But within that frame, it's actually pretty hard to argue with.
So like how a child would think that their parents are really mean for sticking them with needles, but the parent knows that this is what prevents you from catching measles, so it's good for you, even though you can't understand that.
Yeah, and this is something within Mormon doctrine, this idea that even God is, in a sense, bound by deeper natural laws. That is, there are laws that if God would stop following, he would cease to be God, that he is God by virtue of his pristine adherence to these natural laws, by virtue of his pristine fulfillment of all of these things, and that ultimately, it's a moral realist view. There are things that are right, there are things that are wrong, there are things that will orient someone more towards good, there are things that will orient someone more towards bad long term, and those things, we don't actually choose what those things are. Those things are just that way because long term they will lead that way. And the commandments exist as sort of a human parsable guide to that broader underlying natural law.
I'm actually very sympathetic to that thought. I think I've embraced virtue ethics a lot more over the past decade or so. Like that kind of rhymes with that idea and just puts in that God knows what the best virtues are, which would be really convenient.
It would be really convenient. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm speaking of it somewhat sympathetically. I still resonate a lot with aspects of it. I just think that really, I'm left at the point of Mormonism relies on this idea of salvation, the idea that, Christ came and made all these wrong things right for everyone, and you can just turn to him and have all these wrong things be made right. When you strip that out, you're left with a broken and fallen world where us broken and fallen humans are the only ones who can really work to make things right, and whatever we leave broken will stay broken. There's a certain empowerment in that if you want to see it as empowering, and I think you can, but it's also, it removes the safety net.
Yeah. It's a goddamn terrifying, godless universe.
Yes.
There are no parents.
Yes.
Has it been long enough that you feel like a significant psychological distance from that earlier trace, or are you still pretty close?
I think he would recognize me immediately and I would recognize him immediately. And I think if you look at even a younger me, he would be extremely surprised by me marrying a man, for example. That would take him off guard. I don't know that he would be shocked to see me leave the church, but he'd be horrified by it. But in terms of patterns of thought, in terms of ideals, approach, so forth, it's all been one fairly coherent path and fairly coherent pattern arrived at deliberately every step of the way, building on every previous step. I go back and read my old writing. They're very much my writing. I look at my old thoughts. It's very much my thoughts. I look at the ideas that captivated me then. They're the same ideas that captivate me now. I'm very, very much the same person I always was.
If he was brought forward to the present day anime style, would you guys become nemesis or something? Or do you think you would end up cooperating?
He would be absolutely thrilled to see what I'm doing in education, and he would want to hop on immediately. No.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, you said that you seek truth and you admire evangelism, specifically people going out and saying that this is what I believe and you should believe it too, you think is a good thing. I strongly agree with that. But also you've spoken against the new atheists quite a few times, saying that at least they were jerks.
Yes.
How would you have handled the dissemination of anti-theistic knowledge and attitudes?
The thing that frustrates me about the new atheists, that frustrated me in the past, that continues to frustrate me now, is their absolute conviction that religion was just bad and wrong and everyone adhering to it was silly. And people tried to talk them out of it. People tried to tell them it, but they refused to listen on some fundamental level, couldn't get that there was this essential sociological role that these institutions were fulfilling, that you needed some sort of institution in some sort of role like that. And Dawkins really wanted it to just be science. I think I respect Sam Harris because he does take this seriously, and he has taken it seriously since. You know, he took it increasingly seriously after his most strident New Atheist days. He started getting into meditation and secular Buddhism, started with his whole Waking Up podcast. Like, a lot of it is this project, his whole moral foundations thing. A lot of it is this project. And I respect that. But what I found frustrating about the New Atheists, and find frustrating about them, is this blindness to the positive social role that I was experiencing religion playing in my life, and this refusal to countenance the idea that it takes work and it takes structure and it takes seriousness to build a role like that, and that it's not just enough to say, oh, this isn't true, now let's all move on and be free and live happily ever after. So I think that were I to propagate this sort of thing, you want to propagate it. It's kind of tricky because you don't want to actually propagate a negative frame. You don't just want to like take things away per se. You do want to be able to say, here is something better to replace it with. I think the New Atheists thought they had something better to replace it with, and I don't think it's been borne out that they had something better to replace it with. If you look at where New Atheism has gone and how it has mutated and how it has faded, I think that it was fundamentally not a vital enough movement to build something lasting and positive. And as such, it collapsed into social justice progressivism, and it collapsed into anti-woke, and it collapsed into whatever it's collapsed into now. It was a thing that needed to only exist at a transient moment in time because the people within it didn't quite understand the forces that they were dealing with.
As a person who had exactly that argument and believed it strongly, that there is absolutely nothing good that comes of religion, and if we got rid of it, everything would be better and nothing would be worse. I think you're absolutely 100% spot on that this is what we really thought. It's tragic because the idealistic part of me, I think this is part of growing up in the atomized, very individualistic Western society where just the idea is you should be self-sufficient and that you can be self-sufficient. Every man can be their own castle and must make their own way in the world. And it just seemed obvious that religion was just a way to control people and delude them, and there was nothing of value to be gained there. It turns out I was just wrong, and that's really frustrating because I hate the fact that my ideals as everybody can be individualistic and strong and self-sufficient in themselves is just not true.
Yeah, I think that that's been a common experience over the past decade or so, is people sort of grappling with that. And there is, yeah, again, there's a tragedy in that. There's this beautiful ideal and the world falls short of it. For me, it's funny because I wind up being sort of like, I wander into this big anti-tribal tribe and I say, hey guys, here's why tribalism is good, actually. And here's why it's good to have coordinated action towards common ends and so forth. And here's why you do need to be able to work together and build institutions and make things that align short-term impulses with long-term goals and so forth. And I wind up like, because that was the air I breathed, that was always something I believed. I was never quite so individualistic. That's a natural role for me to slip into. But I have a lot of sympathy for people who have always experienced structure as frustration, have always experienced institutions as compulsion, and had this ideal of this beautiful, like, self-made man ideal, this vision of we can just be free and do it right, and we don't need all of this stuff.
I feel now that today it feels like everybody must be in one single monoculture, and we're fighting over what that culture is going to be. Whereas in the past, like, Romans were Romans and they followed different laws than Persians, who followed different laws than, you know, the barbarian tribes, whatever it was. And that was okay. Their gods were their gods and our gods are our gods. And people were both very tribal and also kind of like liberal in accepting that other tribes can exist alongside them as well. I don't know how true that is, or if this is, you know, just my ideal. This sort of liberalism among tribes is the true conservatism, and almost want to return with a V to people can be extremely different and have very different ideals and values and yet still tolerate living alongside each other because, like, hey, we're us, they're them. Yeah, there's some kind of weird aliens, but like that is what works for them, and what we're doing would not work for them. So we're just going to leave each other to have our different values, and it'll be okay.
I would say that that is true of a past, not true of all of the past. That is, and this goes back to last time or another time we came on and we're talking about like the idea of vital religions and so forth. It is not the most natural thing for a religion to accept that there are other religions that one must get along with. That is something that a lesson learned with blood. A lesson learned with a lot of blood, and people did not feel like, oh, I have my thing and you have your thing and it's all fine. They felt like, this is not my thing, this is the thing, and it must spread, and it is absolutely vitally important. And then when they couldn't win over everything, they started realizing, okay, we're going to need some way to get along with these people. And I think that whole we're going to need some way to get along thing is something that every movement, once it realizes it can't actually win over everyone, needs to handle, and some handle it more gracefully than others. And this foundation of liberalism, this individualism, there's this like liberalism between groups, not liberalism as complete atomization, is a balance that was struck as long as people had positive groups to cling to, as long as, you had Christianity with liberalism, as long as you had X with liberalism. But when people try to just have pure liberalism, without any group, that's when you start running up against a lot of the barriers of liberalism.
So I guess this kind of brings me back to the education topic. I've been following what you've been saying about alpha schools, and it struck me in our conversation when you said that you are against school choice because people shouldn't just be like, I opt out of this system to choose that I want to bring my child into a gifted and talented school or a tracking school. Like, this should be a thing that the public schools have as well.
This kind of ties back to different people having different things that they want and being able to pursue them without interference from others. I was very bullish on school choice and letting people just go to whatever schools they want to. You want to push actually reforming the public schools so that they return to tracking, as this is a thing that almost everybody wants. Like, the vast majority of people who are not actually the administrators of education think this is great and want it and realize that it is really helpful for people. Did I mischaracterize you, first of all, when I said that as your position, that you want to reform the public schools?
It's not exactly mischaracterization. What I want is orthogonal to public schools or charter schools. I like to reference Deng Xiaoping in this. It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice, is my opinion on public and charter schools. I want free schools. I do feel strongly that, I have a strong belief in the ideal of free education that is every bit as challenging and serious as education that wealthy people pay for. I think that is where my most egalitarian side comes out, and where I'll say, this is something important and valuable. But in terms of how that is delivered, I just want it to work. So where I stand relative to the school choice movement is I understand and I'm sympathetic to the reasons that people had to create the school choice movement. I am ultimately glad that it exists because it allows a lot of experiments to go. At the same time, I have a very specific set of principles that I want. So take religion, for example, going back to the topic of religion. I think there would be this idea that people would look at kind of peculiarly if someone was like, yeah, there's just a marketplace of ideas for religions. You've got Christianity, you've got Islam, you've got Judaism, and one of these is just going to fill this dominant role, and our role is to create a marketplace for these things so that the best one can win. There's just a certain lack of positive values in that I find inaccurate to how people actually think and what people actually want. And I think that having had so much focus on school choice, qua school choice, has kept people from really envisioning and specifying and fighting for a set of positive values that they want schools to exemplify, such that you have one set of people who have a set of positive values, the education school set, the detract things, and the primary focus is on helping the disadvantaged, and schools as tools of social change and so forth, pedagogy of the oppressed, all of that. Then you have another people saying, let's just escape from this system, stuff is all failing. And you don't really have anyone providing a direct counterweight of, no, actually, we want schools to focus on raising each person to their potential. We want schools to take the process of skill building seriously. We want schools to take pedagogy and expertise seriously, so forth. And ability grouping is part of that, but ability grouping is far from the only part of that. That you can build a fairly cohesive, unified, positive vision that would be appropriate in public schools, private schools, charter schools, home schools, anywhere. And it's orthogonal ultimately to that debate, but just not something that people have been focused anywhere near enough on, I would say.
I don't know. To me, a big part of schools, maybe the largest part of school, if I'm being honest, is the transmission of culture, which is not very different from the transmission of religion. There's some split between the two, but they're very close to the same thing. And people get really upset when you try to take their culture that they were raised in, that they want their kids raised in, and replace it with a different culture that the state feels is better, which really is driving me towards thinking maybe there shouldn't be any mandated single school, and instead just a whole lot of different cultures providing schools, which the state then pays for the people to go to, that Christians can send their kids to Christian school, and secular Americans, whatever that we use that word for them, can send their kids to secular school. I feel like that would be better, because that would prevent this fighting that happens when a minority feels that their culture is being replaced with this liberal, drug-using, gay, sex-having, whatever their stereotype of the primary liberal culture of the U.S. is.
You know, in a functional culture, I actually disagree with that. I think that there are a lot of places where most people don't have really much of a problem at all, because they trust their broader country's culture and they trust it to serve their interests well. And you're only experiencing a tension because a lot of people have started feeling like the broader country's culture maybe isn't serving their interests well, or more specifically, the culture within education is no longer aligned with what they would identify as the culture of their country. So, you know, you could look at a lot of other countries, say, you know, the progressive ones like Sweden, whatever. You can look at places like Singapore or Korea or China or England, or really any country you care to name. Most of these countries are going to have common school systems in their country, and people are going to have some quibbles, people are going to have whatever, but you won't have large organized forces of lots and lots of people saying, we want some sort of different thing with all of this, or then all of this, and we are outraged that this thing is going on. I think that it's a fairly small minority of people who feel very strongly about we need a different culture, so forth. More importantly than that, alongside that, I think, it is valuable for a country to say, well, actually, this is we do have a culture as our country, and we do want to transmit this culture as our country, number one. And number two, I think it is valuable and accurate that no matter what culture you want to transmit, no matter which ideas you want to transmit, there are common underlying ideas that make pedagogy effective and ideas that make pedagogy less effective. And we should understand and be able to express those ideas and have them clearly articulated in whatever form of school one chooses, whatever subject one wants to teach, that are not going to be well served by a decentralized, everyone has to figure these principles out for themselves sort of way. The same reason we have economics, for example, is the reason we would want clearly understood, unified, cohesive science of education.
So I got two things about this. I don't think that the U.S. has a single culture anymore, and I don't know if it ever really did. We certainly at least had the myth that we have one unified culture for at least a few generations. Do you think we have a single culture, or that if we don't, that we should return to one?
Ultimately, there is going to be a dominant culture. I wouldn't say the U.S. has a single culture or has ever exactly had a single culture, but it does have a dominant culture, and it is appropriate for the institutions of a country to reflect that country's dominant culture. And by all means to make leeway and to make arrangements for people who are outside that dominant culture to have some degree of connection. But it is appropriate for, say, British schools to be British. It is appropriate for American schools to be American and to transmit a set of ideals that we would agree, or people would be able to close enough to agree, are American ideals, American values, so forth. I think that's appropriate and it's fine. And I think it's also appropriate and fine for people to say, I don't actually want to have that, and I'm willing to put in the time and effort and work to build a different set of institutions. And at the same time, in all of those institutions, a lot of the things will still look the same. You'll still have people who need to learn to read. You'll still have people who need to learn math. You'll still have people who need to learn any given subject. A lot of them will still rely on the same resources and same materials. You know, it's not like Catholic schools and public schools and charter schools and other private schools are using wildly different pedagogy and wildly different resources and having completely non-overlapping ecosystems. There's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of mutual understanding and mutual learning from each other, sometimes in positive ways, often in negative ways, that goes on in those.
Yeah. I liken this to the executive branch drawing more and more power over the years into itself. Whereabouts before, if the other side won the presidency, it wasn't that big of a deal. You could handle it for 4 years. But now that the presidency has immense power, like if the other side wins, it is an absolute disaster. or at least that's the way it feels like it's trending towards people feeling. I don't want the schools to become that as well, where it is just this death battle all the time. If there is a group that thinks, I want all the children to be taught in completely equitable ways, everyone gets the same lessons every day, and if that is crippling to the majority of society, that's fine. I don't care. Like, I know they're going to fight tooth and nail for that no matter what. And so I want them to just have their own schools where they can do that, and I don't have to fight them, and they can fuck up their kids' education if they want, without destroying the main mass of the rest of the U.S. school system.
That's cool. They want your kids in their schools, and they're going to fight for that. Like, so
I know, right? That's the thing. They have taken over the main schools, and I would like there to be a much more shattered system of schooling so that they can have their own little schools and do that, and not impinge on the rest of us.
Great. So they're going to fight for their positive values, and you're going to fight for decentralization in service of the ideal of hopefully someone else creating values that you're aligned with, and then building schools in line with those values. And you can have a nice fight between someone's set of positive values and your ideal of a certain lack of positive values and so forth. And we'll see whose positive values ultimately win out there.
All right. That's how it's going to be. I'm bullish on the fact that most of the population agrees with you, but on the other hand, the people in power don't. And this is a real problem. How's your foundation fighting against that? Trying to bridge this divide?
So it is a problem, I would agree, but this is going to be where I go back to sort of blaming the people who align with me. Like, I don't feel like I should have to be building this. I feel like the sort of thing that I want to be building should have already been built. I feel like people should have already been fighting for the things I should have been fighting for, should have been building institutional support for the things that I'm trying to build institutional support for, that there is a void where there shouldn't be a void, and that really there are a lot of people, like, if a lot of people agree with this, where are the people who agree with it, who have been willing to build for it and do meaningful things in pursuit of it and live their lives around it and so forth? And the answer is a lot of them have been missing. And so one of the first steps is to point to people and say, for example, the effective altruists have generally dismissed education as a cause area. They don't really feel anything there. You have the Brian Kaplan case against education. You have Freddie DeBoer, education doesn't work. You have a lot of just cynicism towards education in general. And part of the first thing I need to do is point out to people who share my ideals and who sympathize with my ideals that at some point, somebody needs to identify and push for and build space for these ideals. And nobody else has been doing it, so we'd better start at some point. And in terms of convincing institutions and so forth, I think that mostly proceeds by finding people who are already vaguely sympathetic, who have this awakened as the issue raises salience and so forth. As the issue gains salience, people see it happen, they have to take explicit stands. Suddenly, people figure out, oh, I actually do like advanced classes, or I do like this, or I do like that. But for all of that to happen, you need to have an organized coalition of people who actually care and are actually willing to talk and fight and think about these things.
Okay, this part I find absolutely fascinating isn't the right word, curious, mind-boggling. So the Center for Educational Progress is what it's called, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, how does one go from a world where you are a Tracing Woodgrains, a guy in the world, to a world where this institution now exists? Do you put out an ad? Where do you get the funding for? How do you decide who to hire? How does any of this happen?
Well, you have a couple of conversations with people who also care about these things, and you look around to see, does something similar enough exist yet that I could just join with that thing? And when the answer is no, you talk with like-minded people and say, hey, should we build something? And they say, yeah, we should build something. And then you file nonprofit paperwork, and then you write a manifesto, and you put out a manifesto, and then you write a list of the things you want to do and circulate it to potential funders and hope that one of them bites. And you just start going from there.
Is there a list of potential funders somewhere? I'm assuming there is a lot more work that goes into all this.
You would assume that, wouldn't you? I don't know that there is exactly a lot more work. So here's the thing, right? Anyone who is visible online winds up getting connected with a lot of people who care about similar things, and winds up knowing a lot of people who are in positions to think about those things and so forth. And so as you develop an online network, that online network, you have a group of people around you who care about and think about a lot of the things you care about and think about. And when you build an institution, you lean on that network. So suddenly, like for me, I have 45,000 Twitter followers, 10,000 Substack followers. That is enough people that I know the people I want to know who care about the things that I care about in the ways that I care about them. It's a very small space, such that as soon as I build an institution, as soon as I say I'm doing a thing, every one of the people I would want to take notice takes notice. And I know like the wealthier people who care about it, who I might be able to ask for fun, whatever. And I know people who know them, so forth. So it's a situation of I wouldn't know how someone would do it going from a base of nothing at all. But when you have a base of enough public visibility to have the landscape, to be aware of the landscape, you're just going to know people, and you're going to be in a position to be visible when you do something.
Do you rent office space? Do you commission like a graphic and stationery?
Right. So we don't currently have office space. We're currently full remote. In terms of commissioning graphics, so far we've mostly been using AI-generated stuff, which some people have given us grief for, but I honestly really like AI-generated stuff. So hopefully...
It's a great tool.
I like it. I hope people get over it if they're really frustrated, but also the way tribal signals correlate, most of the people who really, really hate AI stuff aren't actually all that interested in the other things we talk about anyway, so it kind of works out. Anyway, so you just start like commissioning people to write things. You put feelers out. Like we made a Discord server and had a lot of people hop in, and we started seeing who's willing to volunteer for this, who's willing to volunteer for that, who has things that they are open to doing, so forth. And we just go from there. And a lot of it's ad hoc, and a lot of it gets more organized as we go. And one reason I have a co-founder, Lillian Tara, and a legal director, Tom Briggs, is so that they can take care of all the institutional things that I don't like pay as much attention to. But yeah, you just sort of build.
How much time does this take every day? And how do you decide who does what?
Same way people do anything, really. Like we have meetings to talk about what are our priorities, what are our tasks. Right now, I'm working full-time on it. So how much time does this take every day? I mean, this can be defined very broadly. I would say that I work 10 to 12 hours a day on good days on things I care about related to this, but a lot of that might be tweeting long threads about some things like it. Or this past week, for example, a great deal of that is just doing a deep dive into research in something that I am writing about connected to this. Some of it will be like going on a podcast or talking about it or talking with someone here, talking with someone there. Especially at the stage we're at now, a lot of it is trying to organize our initial message and get that initial message disseminated. And for me, my strength lies in writing. So I'm trying to pull together a few articles that will really capture the vision that I'm trying to capture for people and explain to people the things that I see and why I think they should care about them.
Didn't realize there was that many hours per day. Weren't you also organizing or at least co-leading a charge to take back the Democratic Party, bring it back into the moderate middle?
I've never been like explicitly, I am organizing things with that. I have been an advocate for that sort of thing and talking about here's why that sort of thing is important. The way I see the CEP fitting in with that is there are institutions that I would identify, fledgling institutions, things like the Progress Studies guys that are broadly aligned with the things I want, broadly friendly to things I want. And I am trying to sort of carve out a niche within that with the CEP and say, here is what education policy should look like with the values that I have. And here are the aligned institutions that I'm working with. For example, I have a podcast coming out soon with Jeremiah Johnson of the Center for New Liberalism, and we're talking about education policy, and we're talking about these things. In terms of other things, right now, in particular, I am fairly exclusively focused on the CEP, never going to be 100% exclusively focused on the CEP. I'm a scattered person with scattered priorities, but like this education stuff, I have a great deal to say on it, and I care a lot about it, and there are so many interesting moving parts for me to dig into that when I say I work 10 to 12 hours a day on some of the things where I have been this past week, it's because this stuff fascinates me, and I'm diving into like thousands of pages of research on this subtopic that I care a lot about, and I want to understand every bit of.
I'm really looking forward to seeing more things that come out. Can you keep me posted on major events?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully this article that I'm working on will come out later this month, and I'm very excited about it. It is potentially one of the more controversial and certainly one of the most heartfelt and important to me articles that I'll have written, and has taken more research than pretty much anything else I've done. So I'm excited.
That's a lot. I've seen some of the research you've done on things.
Yeah, it's been a process.
How do you feel the progress is going on retaking the Democratic Party towards a more moderate center?
It's tricky in the sense of a lot of the on the ground level popular energy, the people who have been organizing, who have been putting in work, who have been caring about it are socialists. And so you have people like Zoran Mamdani and people like Eneasz and Bernie Sanders doing a bunch of rallies that really have more of the like populist heart of like people who are actually willing to organize and talk about these things and do these things. That's just the reality we're dealing with right now, that's pretty popular. And the quote-unquote centrist wing, you look at the Democratic primary in New York City, and no one likes Andrew Cuomo. He sucks, but he has inertia and he has name recognition, and that's what Democrats are fielding other than the socialists are people that suck and who have inertia. I think that people should just need to get involved, just need to start organizing, start taking politics as an endeavor seriously, and start to recognize this whole paradox of the center that I've been talking about in tribalism and all of these things. My tribe, my anti-tribal tribe, my anti-politics political people, so forth. A lot of my message to the people I care about is other people have been doing these things, and you can either choose to be ruled by those other people or you can put work in. What is it going to be? I think that that's a message that is increasingly appealing to people, but takes time. Coalitions take time to build.
I mean, it's a good goal, but it doesn't feel like it has the fiery stoking your passions that the populists have. And I don't know how to get people fiery stoked passions on moderate centrism.
Yeah, and I don't know that you need to get people's fiery stoked passions on moderate centrism, qua-moderate centrism. The abundance guys are doing great work getting people passionate about abundance, and that's still like technocratic, still kind of wonky, and it's still really conciliatory with the like further left guys, but it is a positive vision to work towards, and one that a lot of people agree on and can shape parts of things, and I think that's part of the picture. Or I would argue that excellence and this quest to revitalize education is another thing that people can get really passionate and fiery and serious about. You can find topics that people will get really passionate and serious and fiery about, like the progress studies stuff. There's a ton in there, and it all evens out to a sort of centrism, but it's not like they're getting fiery about moderation. They're getting fiery about wanting to see things work. They're getting fiery about living in a world where institutions are in crisis and everyone touching those institutions is trying to make them worse, is so often how it feels like. You can absolutely build passion in saying, look, we want these institutions to work. We want to do it right. We care about competence. We care about expertise. We care about approaching these topics with a sort of seriousness that's been missing. And here's how you can do it. Is that a winning message on a populist level? I mean, I'm not a populist. Throw them bread and circuses. No, I kid. But like, is it something that you can at least build a coalition on? Yeah, I mean, I think, say, for example, getting a candidate up on stage for the 2028 debates is very feasible and would be fantastic. Usually the early stage candidates don't actually have that high of requirements. And as soon as you can have a salient part of the coalition, then people will start like trying to pander to it. And that's useful.
I've recently heard someone arguing, instead of creating nonprofit institutions, creating churches, if they are focused on similar things that don't have a political bent. I'm not sure if that would work for education. Do you think that would turn off more people? And did you consider it at all as when you were starting the Center for Education Progress to like incorporate it as a church organization, or is that just a terrible idea?
I didn't consider it. That is something that I would potentially do for my broader project, is to incorporate it as a church. But I think that Center for Educational Progress is more naturally a nonprofit.
I'm worried about people being turned off just by the church label, even if it would be a pragmatic, smart way to incorporate.
Yeah. I mean, if something is a religion, then you can incorporate it as a church. So,
yeah. One last thing. You have spoken very highly of Manifest. It sounded like it is a really meaningful thing to you, where you have found your people, maybe. What makes Manifest this special, important thing to you?
I have always been, around the rationalists, but not quite a rationalist. I have always been around the effective altruist, or for a while been around the effective altruist, but not quite an effective altruist. I have been adjacent to a great many things, and in that adjacency, in that spot, people will look at it like on Twitter, there's the teapot guys. In that spot, there have been a lot of people united by this common curiosity about a lot of the ideas I care about, and just a common intellectual energy, sort of this almost an alternate university. Like, well, the universities have, in my eyes, become less and less curious and less vital as institutions where people go to seriously throw about ideas and to talk about things and wrestle with things. There's been this sort of decentralized online coalition in and around basically Slate Star Codex. The criterion that I'd sort of point to is, does this person read and enjoy Slate Star Codex, or did they read and enjoy Slate Star Codex? To identify like a lot of people I care about and are interested in the things I'm interested in. And Manifest is interesting because it's nominally a prediction market thing, but in practice, it's people from that group getting around and talking and caring about these things. It holds a special place in my heart as well because like they're the first group to invite me, hey, do you want to be a guest at our event? And that's very flattering and very fun, and I appreciate them. But yeah, it's like you get along with the organizers, you go there, you get along with the people there, you look around and you're like, these are all the people who understand the ideas I care about, who care about similar things, who I can talk about my passions with, and they'll get it. And it's a rare and it's a cool thing.
What is the breakdown of how you spent your hours during the 2.5 days of Manifest?
So I had a couple of presentations that I was giving. I had one on education policy and one on internet nonsense, which felt appropriate to divide it like that. And then my conversation with you. I went to another 5-ish presentations, 5 or 6, something like that, and then spent most of the rest of the time talking with people. Had a couple of dinners that I went to different places for. Had one party that I went to at the end of one of the evenings, mostly just running around talking with people as much as possible.
Was it still just as wonderful as the previous years?
Oh, it was fantastic. No, it's always a great time.
Has your relationship to Manifest changed over the 3 years that it's been going on?
I wasn't there the first year. Second and third years, my relation to it was pretty similar in that both times it was just come as a guest and talk about things, give a couple of presentations, and then run around talking with people and all of that. I would say like the first year, you're meeting a lot of people in person for the first time. And the second year, you see a lot of familiar faces all of a sudden who wouldn't have been familiar faces before. So that part of the dynamic has changed, and it feels sort of like coming home in that sense, but broadly similar.
Do you think you'll be coming back next year?
Oh, I hope so.
I have kept you for more than I said. Thank you so much for joining me. This was wonderful, and I can't wait to see you again sometime.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
All right, 2 things before we end. First, 2 episodes ago, when I interviewed Miranda about living well with high P doom, I mentioned her short story. Unfortunately, it did not get posted before the show went live. However, it is posted now. There is a link in the show notes. In that episode, I referred to it as Skin, which was the working title, but the actual published title is Love Stays Loved. It's really a great short story, guys. It's a fictionalized account of living with high P doom. It's got Lovecraftian technological horrors. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Again, Love Stays Loved at lesswrong.com or link in the show notes. And finally, at this podcast, we do partner with the Guild of the Rose. Normally at this point, me and Stephen would talk about the Guild of the Rose for a minute or so and mention why they're cool and maybe tie them into the episode that we just did. Stephen isn't here today, so I am doing the awkward thing where I can't do that, and instead am just going to tell you about the Guild of the Rose myself. Today's episode is brought to you by the Guild of the Rose. They're a vibrant community. They are dedicated to personal growth and self-improvement, helping all of us improve our rationalism. They have weekly workshops, and they sort you into an online cohort so you get to know people and have a supportive community, which personally I think is a huge value add. Sometimes when people ask me how can rationality improve my life, well, first I say that epistemology is incredibly important. It's the washing your hands before you eat of knowledge. But secondly, I will usually send them to the Guild of the Rose. You can join them today at guildoftherose.org or follow the link in the show notes. Also, normally we thank a patron for helping support us and bring all of this stuff to you at this point, but it doesn't quite feel right to do that without Stephen, so I'm just going to put that on hold until he's back. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.